The bandwidth for this episode of the AR-15 podcast is sponsored by the Firearms Radio Network. Firearmsradio.tv.
Welcome to episode number 88 of the AR-15 podcast. I'm your host, Reed Snyder, and with me today are both of my co-hosts, J.W. Ramp and Anthony Hardy. This is the podcast about your favorite black rifle. The show is for you whether you're building your first AR or you've been building ARs for years. There's something we can all do to take our black rifle to the next level. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm actually here, even though my video's not working, so yay.
Well, we're glad to have you. J.W., how are you doing?
Oh, I'm kind of in the same boat. Still recording from the hotel Wi-Fi, so hopefully those of you out there with high-def audio setups will forgive us for the limited microphone setups we've got right now.
Well, you know what I should do is just highlight my video feed so that everybody can gaze at my visage. You know, everybody keeps telling me I have a face for radio, so.
That works for me, yeah.
So, JW, I see you got a new little icon here for your non-video image, and it looks like there's a cohort standing behind you with the name Yeti on his plate carrier. Is that Sasquatch that I see on the front of yours?
Not necessarily. That guy behind me is Steve Fisher. He used to be a instructor with Magpul Dynamics, and he's split off and doing his own training company now called Sentinel Dynamics.
You know,
and
I want a couple of packages.
Sentinel Concepts, I think.
Well, I got to tell you,
I think he'd actually kill me for calling it Sentinel Dynamics because he hates those buzzwords.
Well, so we've got another good night planned ahead of us. We're going to be covering an interesting topic that may actually get the same kind of hate mail that we get for optics discussions and reloading discussions. But before we get there, we want to let all of you listeners know that Brownells helps make this show possible. So don't forget the Brownells is there with their 100% a lifetime satisfaction guarantee. And they're there for you anytime you have a problem, like when you can't remove the taper pins from your new barrel to slip off the front sight base, and now you have to find a new barrel. So we are continuing our build that has been graciously sponsored by Brownells, and we are at the point of installing our gas tube and our Arms Inc. silhouette folding front sight, which is the replacement front sight for what would have been an otherwise, I guess, a mil-spec standard front sight base included on the Colt barrel that we can't use because the taper pins were, I don't know, fusion welded into the front sight base somehow. In any case, we've adapted and overcome our difficulties in grand fashion with the help of Brownells, and I've put a link in the show notes so that you can take a look at the new folding front sight. I think you're going to be suitably pleased, undisclosed, not yet drawn future potential owner, with the choice we have here. I think it's really an outstanding option when it comes down to putting on a alternative front sight base for our purposes here. But with that, I want you to remember that shopping for AR-15 parts at Brownells can go a long way towards helping the show. So go to ar15podcast.com/parts to give us a little help. So, Anthony, have you got something for us here?
Yeah. I've been talking about it for a long time, and I finally, it's not what would be really suitable for our show here, but I have been thinking about this for a long time and finally got around to getting myself a, let's see if I can say it correctly, a Mosin Nagant.
Mosin, isn't it Mosin?
Mosin.
Bozine.
Yes, if you're doing it properly, but I don't. So, yeah, I'm mosing the gun, and got it out to the range this weekend, and man, that was fun. Uh, I guess I don't know what the difference is, but my groups were tighter with that than they were with my AR at 100 yards. So, I guess they really should be, but
Not really. That's kind of sad.
I knew you would say something.
I'm just going to go on record as saying that's really sad.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before.
What can I say? Like, you may have probably missed it, JW, but I was doing some stuff that I was playing with out at the range. I get there early in the morning. There's nobody there. It's a public range at a national park, and I can basically just run around and have fun, and because there's nobody else there, and I actually shoot better on the move than I do standing still or with bench rest, which was really strange. So, what's that, Reed?
This would be 100 yards with 77 grain, open tip. At hand loads, 23 grains of CFE 223. I think that's a pretty darn good group at 100 yards. And you'll have to forgive me, I was grouping my groups in different places all over the target so that I could not have to wait 20 minutes.
Sure. We believe that, Reed. That target's got those groupings that are grouping around the target. Mm-hmm.
Now, you see, here's the thing, Anthony. I'm willing to take you to the range any day and show you through repeatability that I can do that.
I kind of can't do that yet.
Any day. Any day.
I will make a trip to Texas one day.
All right. Well, I'm glad you got a Mose, and I'm really kind of feeling sad for you that it shoots better than your AR.
I don't.
Good fundamentals.
Like I was going to say, I really don't think it has that much to do with the rifle. I think it has to do with me, and I don't know. It has a really nice trigger. I don't know. I just didn't. It was fun.
All I'm hearing is blasphemy coming out of your mouth.
Yeah. You've got a trigger that was pressed out of a tuna can in a World War II factory out of a bombed out cafe or something in Russia's heartland. And I got to tell you, just for comparison's sake, the Russians sure did field a whole lot of weapons suitably designed, built, and constructed for the purpose for which they were intended. But now we have modern manufacturing technologies, and I just can't believe you're saying that here at Heresy here.
Yeah. There's no telling. Maybe I warmed up on the AR and I actually got myself dialed in when I went over to, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe the recoil actually helps. I don't know.
Well, let's move into this week's tip. I want everybody to know that the build is out in the garage with a little bit of Loctite trying to get set. So I don't want to bring it in here and potentially risk fiddling with our front sight base. But one of the things that I have come to develop in installing a front sight base or a gas block for myself is kind of a series of steps I take to make sure that I've got everything lined up on my devices. The things that you're concerned with are, I think, probably threefold. Number one, you want to make sure that your front sight base or gas block is positioned correctly above your gas port. If there is any slight overlap where you're obscuring the gas port with any portion of the front sight base or the gas block, there's the risk that in closing that aperture, you're increasing the velocity of the gases that are going through there. I think that's going to cause an excess of wear, and it potentially is going to cause some abuse to your rifle that isn't necessary. Two, you want to make sure that when you're installing your front sight base or gas block that you're not imparting any rotation on that because of two factors. The first is your gas tube will be torqued at an unnatural angle from what it's intended. And two, your front side base, your anything attached to it is going to be skewed or canted one direction or another, and that is going to be affecting your sighting through iron sights. And I think the only way to explain how bad it can get is if you imagine a front sight base, your front sight post, your front sight at a 45-degree angle, and that is a hyperbolic approach to understanding what just a slight cant will do. But now imagine every time you raise or lower your post, you're not actually doing it straight up and down, you're doing it at an angle. And so as it goes up, it's going to the right or to the left, depending on the cant, which is going to affect your windage. And you can see that if you're going to try to zero your rifle, you're going to get really out of whack really fast if there's any angle to that at all. So I think maybe that is only well, no, there's a third issue. You want to make sure that your front side base is also properly secured to the barrel. So keeping that in mind, there's a number of things to consider depending on what it is you're using, and that would be really relevant once you've made a choice. But gas blocks tend to have either clamps or holes drilled and tapped underneath the gas block with set screws or Allen head set screws, and so dimpling on the bottom is going to affect the I guess securing that from a perspective of the set screws that come from beneath. And clamping, I'm not really sure that there's any adequate way to secure it other than to really get a good hard set on those screws and clamp them tight and put a little blue Loctite in there. But when it goes down to what I do to install a front sight base or a gas block, I have a bent paper clip, and I basically use it to identify the boundaries of the port for the gas to escape into the gas tube, and with that I can then reproduce those measurements with my bent paper clip on the top of my barrel, so I can get a rough idea of where that hole is going to be in relation to my gas port. Then I tend to put a piece of masking tape and roughly gauge my top dead center in relationship to my drilled gas port, and then I take another piece of tape onto whatever it is I'm mounting, be it a gas block or a front sight base, and try to find its center position. That way, when I'm lining up my front sight base, it's less about some kind of visual eyeball check of whether or not it's canted or leaning one way or the other. I try to line up my marks, and in doing so, I've had really good fortune all of the times I've installed one of the gas blocks or front sight bases. The key thing to remember is that if anything is wrong when you're using the rifle after installing one, go back and double check your work, triple check your work, and if you need to, install it again. It doesn't hurt it. It's not going to affect anything, but you certainly do want to get these things right. So, J.W. Anthony, have you installed, either one of you, a new front sight base? And Anthony, I don't mean you taking a Dremel to your old one and cutting it down to size.
Yeah, I actually did. I did take my old one off. I don't know if you remember that. I was able to get those pins out on my Bushmaster and put in a low-profile gas block, and it went rather well. After, I think if you go back and listen to some of those previous episodes, you can hear a little bit of my adventures with trying to get the flash hider off the muzzle without the proper equipment, so that was a lot of fun. But, yeah. I've done it, and the lining it up, I read a lot about that and how important it was to make sure everything, like you talked about, to prevent wear, et cetera, et cetera. But so far, so good. Of course, that could also be part of the reason that I can't hit anything, too. You never know.
Yeah, I don't think your gas block being off kilter has anything to do with.
Oh, come on now, give me a break. I'm trying to find something other than me. It just doesn't work.
JWU, have you had to do any fiddling with your front side base or gas blocks?
I haven't put one on a new barrel. When I was fiddling with my AR-10 and running it suppressed, I put an adjustable gas block on it.
Right.
And so that was pretty easy as far as just drifting out the pin that was already there and switching it out. So.
Well, whenever it comes down to the front sight base of gas block, I mean, these are really integral parts of the workings of your black rifle. So it's always important to double check your work, and it's always important to check that work after you start using the rifle to make sure you're not going to run into any issues with anything shifting or moving on you. So, but I think with that, we'll go ahead and leave our tip of the week, and let's start talking about our main topic. So tonight's main topic is zeroing the modern sporting rifle. Gentlemen, how many times have you guys had to go and re-zero your rifles?
JW, you go first.
Oh, not too often. I guess it's just when there's some sort of change that's made. With my bolt gun, it's kind of a constant process of rechecking it if I'm working up a different load or something like that. But with my ARs, all the ammo kind of lands in about the same place, and so I just kind of get it close, and it's good enough for me. With an SBR, I'm not really sitting down in a vise shooting groups at 100, so it's just kind of getting in the neighborhood where like relevant sized targets at relevant distances are going to be hits.
So JW, when you're shooting your SBR, you're basically, you train with that mostly, don't you?
Yeah, that's definitely the most common gun that I'll bring out.
And so basically, you have configured your SBR as kind of a work gun, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not there to, plink or play. You're trying to get yourself proficient in the kind of the close quarters into things, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
I'm just putting
Anthony,
together a different one that I haven't sighted in just yet. I got one of those KMR uppers from Bravo Company that came in, and I only got to hold it for about a half hour on my last visit home. I was kind of in and out real quick. But I've got a 1-to-6 power primary arms scope that I put on that, and I'm looking forward to taking that out to the range and sighting that in.
Well, that's good. Anthony?
Yeah. Well, my zeroing experience is, well, let's just say I did it the way I do most everything. I got out there with no clue, except that I knew you could move things around, and just took a regular old target and started shooting at it, and had no idea that I was, at 25 yards, if I was going to zero. I didn't know what a 5200 zero was, didn't know what anything was at all, and couldn't even hit paper at 50 yards for a long time because I didn't understand that. So, and then I've changed around my irons, tried different irons, different kinds of things, and I've zeroed every time I've changed those. But where I am now, I got out and zeroed, and I haven't had to touch it once I finally got, did the proper reading, which we'll talk about today, and got out there, and that was probably 6 to 9 months ago, maybe. I think I talked about it, I guess, probably like January or February. It was right after I came to start with, and I was like, I probably need to learn what a true proper zero is, and I did a lot of reading and found some proper targets, and I did it wrong like the first 3 times. I don't know how I did it wrong. I still don't understand what I did wrong, but I think it took me 30 rounds or something like that, which is a ridiculous number of rounds. But yeah, once I got it set, I've got my offset irons on there. I got my red dot zeroed. Even that little cheap $25 red dot so far, I haven't had to rezo or anything. It still stays right on target.
Well,
As best I can put it on target
that
anyway.
might be why you can't hit the target, though. Have you ever?
I've double checked it several times, and it works. It works when I'm bench rest at 25 yards. She's shooting a 300-yard target. It works, but not when I'm trying to do much of anything else. So,
okay.
No, I do exaggerate my lack of skill there some. I mean, I have gotten better quite a lot, but yeah, still nowhere near where I'd like to be.
Well, let's move into our topic then. So, I think it's probably good to cover a couple of basic terminology items. These are things we're probably going to come up again and again. But, basically we've got point of aim, point of impact, trajectory, aperture, and zero. So the definition of zero is probably the place we ought to start. That's essentially identifying a range at which your target is going to
that's where your point of aim equals your point of impact, right?
Right. You're choosing a place or a distance at which your point of aim and your point of impact are going to hit each other. Your point of aim is basically that line of sight that your eye is going to create by lining up a front sight post with whatever rear aperture you're going to use. Your point of impact is going to be the terminus of an arc that your bullet is going to travel. Bullets do not, in fact, travel straight distances. If they did, they would hit the earth very rapidly with the effects of gravity. So essentially, every bullet out there at probably any good distance is thrown up much like a Hail Mary pass. It travels down an arc, and I think that if any of you have seen a ballistics table, you've seen the arc that is present in most of that bullet travel. Certainly, that brings up trajectory, which is just basically that arc of travel that your bullet is going to fly through. And then your aperture and your front sight post are the components of iron sights that you have to line up in order to get your point of aim oriented towards the target. So I'm sure we could elaborate on some of those things, but I think we'll probably give them enough food for fodder when we get through the rest of the discussion points. So as I am wont to always preach, iron sights I think are very important for any shooter to understand and to be able to use, but one of the things that I think anybody who has ever shot a modern sporting rifle in most any configuration is that there are probably a good half dozen different methodologies on how to zero your rifle that are being used and utilized in various corners of military, sports shooting, law enforcement shooting, whatever you can find. I'm sure that there is another way to explain how you should or might want to think about zeroing your rifle. So we've included kind of the three principal methodologies that are or have been used in all of the time that I've understood the black rifle. And so they basically talk about these three in terms of the principal ones, and it's a 50-yard, 200-yard zero, a 36-yard, 300-yard zero, and a 25-meter, 300-meter zero. And to explain to you why there are two distances is for this purpose. Once again, your bullet follows a trajectory, and as it's in the upward portion of its trajectory, it's crossing over the zero line of your point of aim at 50 yards on the first one, and then it's traveling through its arc and falling back down towards the target, and will cross that point of aim at 200 yards. So the benefit of any of these three given methodologies is that you can take a target at a very close distance, a 50-yard distance, 36-yard distance, 25-meter distance, and set your target for the particular zeroing methodology without having to worry about finding the much longer range. The idea being that once you've zeroed in at the shorter distance, you are very close to the longer distance. Now, it's not an exact science, so understand that just being on at 50 yards doesn't make you exact at 200 yards. It makes you close, but not exact. So, have any of you guys basically seen these different methodologies talked about or discussed in the Great Wide Web, or any of the training classes you've attended, or any of the other sources that are available to us all?
Oh, certainly. It's one of those things that guys debate, kind of like they do with different lubes, and it's kind of either based on your use case or the most common range that you're going to be using, or some other factor. Probably most often that's what the Corps taught me.
So I put a link into the show notes that basically has kind of a dissection of the three methods. The 36-yard, 300-yard, and the 25-meter, 300-meter options are going to give you good long-range shooting, and you're going to have a pretty measured high point on your arc of about 9 inches, I think, at the worst. And what this basically means is that throughout the entire travel of the bullet, the highest you're going to get is about 9 inches above your point of aim. And so on that basis, as long as you're shooting at the bottom of a dinner plate, when you go through the entire, trajectory, you're more than likely going to be on target. Now, of course, that is something that means you'll have to always be aiming at the bottom of the dinner plate, and that may not be intuitive for many shooters. But the 50-yard, 200-yard, I think, is one that is gaining a little more popularity because the proven engagement distances that we're seeing in the last decade and a half of conflict are essentially coming well within that 200-yard range, and that zeroing methodology is going to give you a much more consistently, I guess, tighter, flatter shooting trajectory. So certainly after 200 yards, you're going to have a lot of drop-off, and you may not have a lot of, I guess, accuracy or comfort with something much beyond 200 yards. But then, like I said, in a shorter engagement distance environment, that's not really going to be of much relevance.
So, Reed, what are your rifles zeroed at?
See, I like the 36-yard, 300-yard.
Wasn't the 36 300-yard that was the Marines, and is this 25-meter, 300-meter Army, or is it the reverse?
When I was in the Marine Corps, I think we were shooting 25-meter, 300-meter, and nothing on our ranges were measured in yards.
Gotcha.
We shot at 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters, 500 meters. There was nothing in yards. So, to be honest with you, I haven't pulled out my old manual, so I couldn't tell you specifically, but I've got all of my notes from all the times I qualified, and so when it comes down to it, it's really something that is a personal preference item. I don't plan on going to combat anytime soon, so I'm comfortable with a 36-yard, 300-yard zero because I like the idea of being able to get onto a target in that span, that distance, and know where I ought to be shooting at any given place.
Yeah, so JW, what do you zero your rifles at?
I tend to be closer to 50 yards, 50 meters, somewhere in there. It lends itself to not really have to think about the holdovers in the distances that I'm going to use the AR for. If you look at those charts that compare the three, if you're using a 25 to 300, 375, whatever it ends up being, if you're using something like that, then yeah, your round is always going to be high throughout the engagement distances, and you're going to be able to hit at those long 300 to 400 meter shots. It kind of ends up making you think too much, in my opinion, and having to hold low and things like that. Because when you're shooting kind of within stone's throw from somebody, you're dealing with some other things like sight offset, and so you kind of got to think about aiming high, and then if it's further out, then you would have to think about aiming low. And I try to subtract some of those thinking variables out, and something like a 50/200 meter zero, it seems like it kind of balances the flat shooting aspect to the 5.56 caliber, and it lets you just aim where you want it to hit from 0 out to maybe 250 yards, and it's going to be within an inch or two.
Well, Anthony, how about you?
Well, I've used the meter, the 25 to 300 meter, because that was the graphic that's very easily found, to be completely honest, when you're searching Google for a target. It took me a little while to find graphics for the other ones, and I'm not really 100% certain. If you guys look at the show notes should have links to a target for each of those three if you want to have access to those, because that really was helpful for me. But the 25 meter, 300 meter, that is a target that's very easy to find online. So I thought, well, if it's that easy to find and it seems to be a standard that so many people use, I'll go with that. And then if you look at the chart for the point of impact that's also linked in the show notes, which is a really nice little graphic there. I mean, I get exactly where you guys are coming from, but when I take a look at that 300-yard zero, I think I'm just going to go center of mass, and unless I'm out at 400 or 500 yards, which yeah, right, I should be hitting the target.
Right. Well, the conventional wisdom of the 5200 is really, I think, proving itself in a big way, because through the path of its trajectory out to about 250 yards, you're only talking about, say 5 inches of total travel. So you're about 2.5 up, 2.5 below your 0 point. And so that's a very small plate. And just like JW was saying, he doesn't have to have a whole lot of thought in mind. If you're shooting, dead center, center mass, 2.5 inches high, 2.5 inches low is still dead center. Dead center enough for it to be done without any thought. So,
yeah, I'm actually re-looking at this and rethinking about it, and that 200-yard group is really tight, and it's what is that? Probably about 6 7, 8 inches, something like that high for the 300 yards.
You have to have the fundamentals down to actually be able to do that.
Okay. I'm going to learn, I promise.
So, once again, I think that discussion of what you're going to choose as a methodology leads into a discussion of purposes. I mean, ultimately, JW is correct. When you're talking about that 50-yard, 200-yard, you're talking about essentially being able to use your rifle from 0 to 250 yards and have a very narrow band through which that trajectory is going to pass, so you don't have to do a whole lot of thinking. You dial it up so that you're going to be able to reach out to 300 yards, 300 meters, and all of a sudden your trajectory increases to a point where you're quite a ways up above that, point of aim at certain parts of your trajectory, and that is going to cause you to have some issues if you're not constantly bringing that to the forefront and how you're picking targets and using them.
Yeah, when we're getting into the purpose discussion, while I know that there's arguments that say, oh, well, you can shoot 800 meters with a red dot. I've seen the videos. I've seen Haley do it with the blackout. I've seen stuff like that. But in all reasonable circumstances, you're probably going to want some magnification when you get to a level where you're shooting out past 200 or 300 meters. And when we're talking about a battle zero, it's something that you set and you leave it. When I'm looking at a shooting scenario where I'm going to be stretching out further than 300 meters, I'm probably going to be wanting to click in some adjustments on the scope or use like a particular kind of reticle with mil dots or whatever your choice is inside of it to do those compensations for me, rather than depending on, okay, the middle of the reticle needs to be on the target and it's going to be this many inches off. Well, you would just use the hashes in the reticle to take care of that offset for you.
Right.
So it's kind of two different, I'm sure we'll get into it, but it's like two different cases. The battle zero is something that you set and forget, and then the bullets kind of hit in different places, whereas going into those longer distances, there's some other tools available that maybe you can either make some adjustments to the scope, or the scope kind of lays it out for you right there in the reticle.
Right. Well, and I think that's probably another thing to consider. A lot of the ideas about methodology are based on the old A2 style upper, which had the rear sights as an integral component to the upper, and the methodologies initially were designed around those sighting systems, rear sights. Today with the flat top uppers, with the large variety of rear sights, more often than not, you're going to get a rear sight that isn't going to be able to adjust for elevation. When we sighted in with the A2, we were trained to actually use that sight and basically dial in our range. So we would know how many clicks to set for our rifle if we were going to shoot at 500 meters or if we were going to shoot at 200 meters. And so we didn't have holdovers. We weren't trying to figure out some Kentucky windage on the deal. We would dial in that dope and we would set the rifle for the conditions. Today, I don't know that you can say that is a viable way of doing things when you don't have rear sights that are going to adjust for elevation. Now, you can find them, and I will tell you that of the rear sights that I have, I like to choose ones that do adjust for elevation. So that's important for me. That's why I have the Knights Armament rear sights, because the I guess the column allows for me to adjust out to 600 meters. It's another reason why I have a kind of the mil spec carry handle with the rear sights in it, because I like to have that available. But just like JW was saying, when you don't have adjustability, you set a battle 0 because you can't really adjust it, because there is no methodology, no mechanism on the sight for adjusting it. You set it and you leave it. You don't worry about it again.
Right, and conditions often declare that you're not going to have time to change it when you need to. So it's a compromise situation.
Right.
All right, so what about, we talked about this really, really briefly before the show, and I'll be honest, I'm still not completely clear, so I'll be asking some stupid questions, I'm sure. What about the difference in scopes versus iron sights?
No, scopes aren't really the point here. Let's finish our iron sights discussion, and then we'll pick up with scopes here. So, here's some considerations when you're talking about anything on your iron sights. Number one, remember, once again, like JW said, if we're going to talk about which methodology you're going to use, you have to consider the requirements of the mission. Now, that's not really what I'm talking about for terms, in terms of most of us. But let's call mission for, let's call what it is we're going to do with the rifle that day our mission. So JW does a lot of extensive training. A lot of it's close quarters. A lot of it is really designed in a way to test them at this near and intermediate ranges, and very little of it is designed to have him shoot his rifle out to 500 meters. So the requirements that he faces basically put him in a different position from, say, me, if I want to go out and just kind of test my metal and see if I can still reach out at the long ranges like I could when I was 18, and see how good I still am. So my mission for the day changes from his. So we have different considerations when we go to the range on how we want that rifle zeroed when we begin. Another important consideration is that ammunition tends to vary between manufacturers, bullet weights, different components of its construction, and so the ammunition used is going to probably affect on a spectrum how useful any given zeroing methodology is going to be. I think another important thing to remember is that ease of use. JW pointed out with the 50 yard to 200 yard, if you're 2.5 inches up to 2.5 inches low out to about 250 yards, you're not going to have to do a whole lot of thinking. If you aim center mass, you're going to hit center mass. On my 300 yard zeros, my highest arc is 9 inches. So I'm 9 inches off the target, and I think that's right around 175 yards. So, at 175 yards between, probably pretty close to almost to 300, I'm 6.5 inches outside of the cone that JW is shooting in, so I have to be cognizant of that every time I'm at those intermediate distances. So ease of use is an important thing to consider when you're out there trying to do this. And I think that the thing, another thing to remember is that the methodologies are there to get you to your final distance where you are supposed to fine-tune it. 50 yard zero basically gets you on paper near 200 yards, but you need to go to 200 yards and zero the rifle so it's on at 200 yards. 50 yard zero doesn't get you there yet. It just puts you on the paper. So what we're really talking about is a methodology to get to a 200 yard zero so that between your rifle and 200 yards, your bullet's traveling a consistent and repeatable path or trajectory. And I think finally, the thing that I'm going to stand on, and I don't know if I'm going to get hate mail for this, is that there is no best answer. These are all fact-intensive considerations. And if you were to take any one of these, I guarantee you that a competent shooter can explain to you the facts that would make one better than the other, and they can make them all better than any other in any given different scenario or set of facts. So there isn't a best answer. There's just the answer that works for you based on what your facts are at the moment. So don't get hung up on trying to do the best or the one that's going to be able to get you, 100% result versus a 99% result. I mean, it's just kind of a futile search. Figure out what works.
Right. When we're talking ballistics, we're not shooting rounds that are going 10,000 feet per second. There's going to be an arc, and that bullet's going to go up, and then it's going to go back down. And with optical sighting systems, we're dealing with a laser beam straight system. So it's the interface between a curve and a straight line where we need to make those decisions. So there's not going to be a best answer. There's going to be a result of consideration of your circumstances, how you're going to use the rifle, and it's going to get you an answer that works good for you in your use case.
So let's talk about scopes.
Finally. No, I'm picking. Sorry.
So as far as methodology, I'm going to tell you the way I do it, and I'm sure that I don't know. Wait a minute. Put that back in the show notes. Whoever deleted that, that was awesome. I think it needs to stay there.
Yeah. For you guys that are listening, there was a nice little meme that was placed in the show notes, and it's I can't remember the character's name from Lord of the Rings. He's sitting there holding his hand and he's talking, and he says, "But scopes are not the point. Let's get back to iron sights now." Yeah.
So when it comes to methodology, and this is just from back in the day when I was shooting my bolt gun, and it's always been the way I've done it. I basically have my rifle bore sighted when I mount a new scope, and bore sighting is just essentially, gazing down the bore at a given fixed target away from where you are now, so that that's a given distance away from where you are, so that you can basically, with the naked eye viewing the target through the bore, can go back to the scope and dial in a setting that comes close to crossing over the same point of aim, point of impact. It's a kind of
I can't recommend that nearly enough.
Yeah.
There's been so many instances where either I've went out to help a friend sight in their rifle, or there's been somebody on a bench just kind of down the range, and they're either putting rounds all over paper or not even hitting paper, and they're getting real frustrated. And a lot of these ranges, there might be a 50-yard bank, there might be a 100-yard bank, but if you can't get something on paper at 50 yards, what are you supposed to do? And bore sighting, I've found, has gotten people really close. And for me, it just involves taking the upper right off of the gun, sitting it on the table, and if it isn't quite pointed at the right angle, or if it's kind of flopping around a little, maybe using some magazines or some pieces of brass to kind of shim it up and get to a place where you can look down that bore, and whether it's the target or whether it's the corner of the target stand or some tree, it's a known point. You look up through your red dot or your scope or whatever, and take those caps off and start cranking it to get it in the ballpark. And depending on the condition of your scope, whether it was on another gun before or whether it's straight out of the box, and how mil spec of a rail you've got. You might have to crank on it quite a bit to get it close, but that's tended to get things in the ballpark pretty well for me, and that's definitely something I always recommend guys try, rather than just frustrate themselves by burning all this brand new ammo that they got for their new gun.
You know, one of the other things that you need to remember when you're sighting in one of these rifles is that there is, in my opinion, no excuse for going out there and having a rifle that you can't, with some degree of certainty, know is shooting where you want it to shoot. I think that you need to be responsible enough to at least to taking these initial steps. You know, it's a personal opinion. You know, it's not everybody's opinion, nor does it have to be. But, you know, I think that it is very important to bore sight before you start, so that you can get out there and be effective in your time and your range time. But so after bore sighting any of my scopes, I basically sit down and either at an intermediate 50 yard or at 100 yards, depending on, you know, where my comfort level is with my scope, I begin to basically, you know, put rounds on paper. And I've heard a mechanism for sighting in your rifle, which is basically to shoot the rifle and then figure out where the hole is you just placed on your paper. Make your adjustments to the scope to center the crosshairs, and then put your crosshairs back on that empty hole and shoot again. Now, I don't really take to that approach. It's not an approach that I've used, mostly because I don't buy $3,000 optics where I know that I can, you know, do 5 clicks and it'll move exactly, you know, however many inches at 100 yards. So for me, I think that would be a little bit of a waste of ammunition. But I just basically hold my crosshairs on my my intended target, and then start shooting until and adjusting until my crosshairs are lying right where I intend to shoot. And I'm comfortable enough with my principles of marksmanship to know that I can do that on a repeatable basis to within half a minute of angle. So for me, that's enough to have that comfort level. You know, certainly that's something that you have to understand about yourself and your skills as a shooter to know whether or not that's something that's going to work for you. But it does work for me. JW, have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, my typical process is get it on paper, and from there, once you're kind of in the general vicinity, throw a couple real carefully placed rounds into the same group, just so that you can ensure, yes, the gun's shooting straight, kind of dialing in the precision part of it before you dial in the accuracy part of it, and just make sure there aren't any other factors at play that are opening up your groups, whether it's a brand new scope and you haven't tightened it down all the way, or whether the first few rounds of recoil have kind of shaken it around and you need to make sure to tighten it up again. So that kind of tells me, okay, everything's working. Now I can start shifting it to be where it needs to be. And then I start making those gross adjustments. And I mean, if I'm shooting at 50 yards, then you really got to put quite a few clicks in if you're 4 or 5 inches off. So I'm not afraid to really dial in a bunch of clicks. Otherwise, you're just going to be making this whole big long string of rounds as you work your way towards the target. So it can be tougher to kind of make those adjustments as you doubt, oh, is that my group size, or is that the adjustment of the scope, and So I'll try and have a couple different aiming points on the paper or on a few different pieces of paper so that, yeah, if things get kind of congested, I can just move on over to a clean sheet and kind of take that question out of the picture.
Anthony, have you any thoughts?
No, I mean, basically it's the same thing that you guys have said. When I go out, if I'm going to zero, I make sure I get on paper, and then I do check to make sure the rifle is shooting basically in the same spot, and then I start clicking to move into the center of the target. It all depends on which target you want to use. And by the way, I should say, I did find what I had used before was a nice forum listing that contains quite a few different targets for different zeros that are really nicely done, very, very good quality. So I put a link to that in the show notes.
Well, that is a good resource. It's always good to find those. So let's just kind of talk in general terms. When I think of scopes, I'm thinking anywhere to from 100 yards out. And I'm more concerned with shot placement. So for me, that's a hunting requirement. And I would rather be precise in my shots than to have an animal that was not effectively taken. So,
Yep.
you know, that purpose, I think, translates into a military law enforcement arena. However, I can't say that there are many places where I'm comfortable with a scope closer than that. Now, obviously, I have a very big, gigantic soft spot in my heart for a VCOG, although I don't have a pocketbook at this point I'm willing to devote to a VCOG, but certainly a 1 to 4 power scope basically gives you that close-in range. So when it comes down to that, I think that's something that is important to consider. The scopes have the ability to be used across the spectrum, but that's not certainly something that's all that relevant more often than not with the way most people shoot. So, JW, any thoughts on purposes for scopes? Any opinions?
Yeah, it's only recently that you're seeing the optical technology to make scopes like a 1 to 6 or a 1.5 to 8 really possible, and so it kind of brings the entire range of capability of the modern sporting rifle to be usable through one tube of glass.
Right.
And it's pretty impressive. There's some pros and some cons. Obviously, we've gotten into that in the past with scope discussions as far as having a crank on a scope to change magnification versus rotating your gun and switching to a red dot or a set of offset irons. There's other ways that guys get around that. The LCAN has like a big switch on the side, so you can switch between 1 and 4 power real quick. But there's definitely some cool options out there that let you go from a close-up to a longer distance shot a lot more quickly, and it covers more use cases. A traditional 3 to 9 power hunting scope isn't something that you're going to want to be shooting at inside the house ranges. It's just not. You're kind of going to be point shooting at that point, and you're going to have both eyes open, and it's just complicated. But there's some really nifty scopes. I've been playing around with that 1 to 6 from Primary Arms. There's some much more expensive options out there. But yeah, I mean, scopes, there's some really cool stuff coming out lately that covers a lot more use cases and doesn't necessarily pigeonhole you into one particular range of distances.
So I think we talked about checking your mounts and setting up multiple targets, so you don't have to worry about congestion when you're trying to sight in your rifle. Any other important considerations you guys can think of when we're talking about scopes and how to basically sight them in?
I guess make sure you know what your clicks equate to. If you're using one of these sighting targets, a lot of the advantages to doing that is saying that, hey, I don't have a 200 or 300 yard range, but I can simulate that with some drops on a piece of paper at 25 or 50. But because you're shooting at, say, 25 yards, that means you're going to have to be putting in 4 times as many clicks as if you would at 100, and you've got like a quarter MOA per click, sort of a setup on your turrets. So it's simple math like that that can trip guys up if they're just getting into it, and they.
Right.
It's funny that there's some really simple things that until you get your head wrapped around it, it's easy to mess up. And oh well, do I need to do half as many clicks because it's only half as far? No, it's actually double. So just make sure to sit down and kind of think through that before you start cranking on those turrets, because you might get yourself pretty close, and on paper you start cranking it a little too much, and you're going to frustrate yourself.
I had a good friend who had a 30-06. It was a Savage, and I know a lot of people don't like those. But he sat down with his scope, and after bore sighting it, he is the only person I know who was able to take a bore-sighted rifle that would hit paper, and through his sight adjustments, get it so out of kilter it wouldn't hit anything. And I don't think he fundamentally understood his scope and the impact of his adjustments. So he got really frustrated, like you're talking about.
We might just kind of throw it around casually, but the difference between elevation and windage is pretty substantial, and it's pretty common as far as which turret is which on a scope. Normally the top one is your elevation. It changes where the bullet hits up and down, and the one on the right side, as you're looking through it, makes your bullet go left and right. Sometimes they're labeled the same just because it's cheaper to print scope turrets the same, and so it can confuse you if you don't keep that straight, and so you want to make it go left, and all of a sudden the bullet's going down. So there's some little intricacies like that can get a little bit frustrating.
Well, I think that it's always been difficult for me to, in the a covered bay, they're not really well lit, trying to look down on a scope and figure out which direction that arrow is pointing for moving it right or moving it up. If you get your directions backwards, you sure will mess your sighting it up pretty quickly. So I think that covers all of the important considerations. Let's kind of talk about the red dot sights and holographic sights. So, JW, you've probably got the most time on the ground using any of these sighting systems with the various training courses you've taken. Can you tell me about the methodology that you've come to understand about getting them sighted in?
Yeah, I don't want to try and portray my experience as anything military related or anything like that. I shoot with a lot of really qualified guys, and I try to soak up as much as I can. But I definitely have never served, never deployed, or used these things in any sort of defending my life situation. Methodology for using these red dots, holographic sights, are situations like that where quick shots are a priority, where engagement distances are shorter, and where the speed that it takes for you to get your gun up and engaging is a priority. And so when we're talking about red dots, that's what we mean. It's a dependable sighting system that is going to be rugged and stand up in those high stress situations, and putting a priority on speed over razor sharp accuracy. It's not to say that a red dot doesn't maintain its accuracy over thousands of shots and over years of dropping it on the ground and everything. But the nature of looking through a little tube at a glowing red dot rather than a set of crosshairs or very sharp defined edges is just that it's something you can lock on very quickly, and the fact that it's illuminated, that it might be red, which is completely different than your target in most cases, it leads itself to that fast-paced shooting situation.
Right. So
there's a couple of choices that you can make when you're choosing them, as far as how big of a dot to choose. Kind of the give and take to that is a finer dot lets you more precisely distinguish your target. So if you're engaging at farther distances, say you're shooting a white piece of swinging steel at 300 yards, if it's just like a disc and you put that red dot over the target and it just disappears, maybe the dot's too big to do that kind of shooting. And so getting like a smaller 1 or 2 MOA dot might be a little better for you. But because it's smaller, it doesn't necessarily stand out as much. So a big 4 to 8 MOA red dot is going to give you that quick acquisition that as soon as you bring that optic up to your eye, it's very apparent. It's not like you're searching for it in the scope. If, say, your brightness setting isn't just perfect to this lighting condition, you're still going to be able to pick it up because it's that much bigger. The other decision that you could make is when going between red dot, like an LED sort of an illuminator, versus a holographic sight, something like EOTech provides, is what you're actually going to be looking at, what the reticle is going to look like, whether it's just a simple dot or whether it's a little more complicated. It's got some other features in it. Now those features include ranging abilities. They include bullet drop compensators, so there might be a couple hash marks below the middle of the reticle that you could hold on those targets that are further out and have it be a repeatable offset, so you're not cranking things and you're not guessing at, oh, well, I'm going to be 9 inches low here. What's 9 inches on this target? Well, just put the second or third hash down on the target and give it a whirl. Obviously, there's pluses and minuses to everything. So red dots, I changed the battery in my red dots on my birthday. I try to remember to do that. Whereas on a EOTech or something like that, which is a holographic sight, you gotta watch them because they tend to go out a little bit quicker than that.
Right, right. So, as far as the means of sighting them in, I know that there is a what would you call it? I guess it's a zeroing target for use with your red dot sight or your holographic sight. And I think what they are trying to account for is basically the sight offset above your bore and the shorter ranges that you are likely to be using one of those sights for. But essentially, I think that the methodology for sighting in one of these is the same as your methodology for a scope, and that's essentially to bore sight it, account for your engagement distance and your elevation over the bore, and then adjust for effect. And I think that once you get in that range, you've got a pretty good optic for almost any purpose that you might need it for.
So have
Yeah,
either
the
one of
only-
you guys... Oh, sorry,
Go ahead. Go for it, Anthony.
I was just going to ask, I've seen a lot of people run magnifiers with their red dots where they flip off to the side. How does that affect your zero at all? Does it affect your zero? Any considerations there when you're running a magnifier with a red dot? Have either of you guys ever done that?
Yeah, I've tried it a little bit when I first put together an AR, and it doesn't affect your zero because it's behind the optic. If you were to put something in front of the red dot, that would be an issue. You run into that when you're deciding about how to set up your gun for use in the dark, as far as whether you put your nods on your head versus on the gun. And when they're on the gun, if you put them behind the red dot or say in front of some sort of magnified optic, because if the nod goes in front of the scope, then it's going to change the point of impact because the image that your scope is seeing is altered. Whereas if it's riding on your head and you're looking through the scope, the point of impact is going to be the same. So that's the same position that a magnifier would sit, and so it's not going to affect your point of impact. There's some compromises that come with magnifiers. Having a magnifier plus a red dot is extra stuff on your gun. It's extra things to go wrong, to get caught on things, maybe a little bit of extra weight. It could be useful for getting that extra view on target for those things that are a little further off that you need to identify. But yeah, I have a tough time paying the amount of money that it costs for a good magnifier rather than just putting it into a full dedicated scope.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah. One of the big things that we run into when we're dealing with red dots is the priority is on closer shots. And so we mentioned it earlier, but it's that height over bore or sight offset that guys will mention. And it's basically the fact that the dot that you're looking through that tube, seeing a dot, that dot is actually riding 2 or 2.5 inches above where the path of that bullet starts. And obviously we're talking about these curved parabolas that our bullet's traveling on. When you line that up with that laser beam straight view out of the scope, in most cases you're going to zero it so that laser beam crosses the parabola of the round at 2 places. And so when we're shooting close up, we're at the beginning of that parabola where that bullet hasn't yet met up with our red dot. And so the bullet's going to be hitting low. And so what you find is, especially at close within the house distances, the bullet is almost not going to have risen at all from the muzzle because it's going so fast and it's just starting off that trajectory. And you're going to hit low by the amount that your scope is above your bore. So that 2 inches, it's going to be consistent. You're going to aim right on target and your bullet's going to hit low every single time. And so it's a training scar that you got to build in and build up that kind of reflective or reflexive ability to make that compensation, because otherwise all your rounds are going to go low. We did the shoot house class and we were using these ID targets and they've got balloons inside of them that you got to hit. Sometimes they're behind the face, sometimes they're in the chest, and you wouldn't believe the amount of holes that we had right in the neck, and we were missing the balloon every single time because we were aiming at the face and the bullet was 2.5 inches low. And so it's just one of those considerations that you're probably not going to have when you're dealing with a scope, because you're not going to be shooting things that close.
Right.
With a red dot, you've got to consider it because you can't zero your scope at 7 or 10 yards, or else every other round that you fire is going to be 10 feet above target if you're shooting at 100 or 200 yards.
Right.
So it's just one of those offsets that you're just going to have to learn to use up close. And those are the kind of situations when you're going to be employing red dots.
Well, and I like the terminology you used. It's a training scar. You know, and
Yeah, and it's a good training scar that you need to build in.
it's something that you need to work on. I mean, if you're going to rely on these, you know, obviously we have a lot of soldiers that are coming back that this is their bread and butter. And this is what they relied on every day, that they carried one of these things. But if you're a non-military, non-law enforcement shooter, you have access to these kinds of scopes, you have to understand how they work and what their limitations are, because you want to be able to use them. And if you're going to use them for home defense, or if you're going to be using them for, you know, killing ground squirrels in your property, varmints, whatever the case, these points are the things that you need to understand so you can get in there and be more effective with the weapon systems that you're trying to utilize. You know, certainly there are a lot of things about my training that were ingrained in me in a way that, aside from just, you know, wanting that experience, you know, of doing it again, they're reflexive, and to the degree that they are, it would be harder, I think, in some instances, for me to kind of realign my thinking to different ideologies, different methodologies, different systems. It's not so difficult that I can't do it, and in a lot of ways I've adopted new technologies and new understandings, but it takes some time. And, you know, if you don't have any of those training reflexes, if you don't have that, you know, thing you fall back on, then you have to develop it yourself. Because without having something to fall back on, you're not going to be able to effectively utilize these things at all. And frankly, when we're talking about these components of the rifle, this is how you make your rifle hit a target. You have to have some kind of a sighting mechanism, and it has to be accurate, and that accuracy is determined by you, the individual who zeroes the sight, and it has to be zeroed in a way that you understand, that makes sense for you, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to use it along any of these ranges, from right up close to, you know, a good long distance, and have any realistic expectation of being able to hit what you're aiming at. So, any last thoughts, guys, about tonight's topic?
Zero is important. Well, I mean, dead serious, you know. I mean, it really is. If nothing else, like you talked about, Reed, you just referenced this really briefly, just a safety issue, making sure that your rounds are within the area in which you're aiming. It's very important.
Right. Absolutely. JW?
No, I mean, I think we covered it. Obviously, there's different choices to make depending on how you're going to use your rifle, and depending on those choices that you make, it's going to give you a set of additional choices as far as how you want to set that up, and so hopefully we haven't confused you too much, and you can kind of navigate your way through this, especially with the show notes, and be able to make some of those choices for yourself.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you have any questions, feel free to write in. You know, that's what we enjoy most about the show, is getting a chance to talk to everybody. And, of course, you know, if you have a problem with the content, we do want to hear it. You can address it to Anthony. Let me give you his work address.
Stutter, stop.
No. Send it all in. We'll take care of it. So, guys, why don't we get to some feedback? Who wants to take the first one?
Well, I'll take this one.
Please do.
It looks like we get feedback like this quite often. And we just want to make sure that we pass it along to you guys. This is from Andrew. Andrew says, we have decided to open our powerful and private website traffic system to the public for just a few days.
Just a few days.
Only a few days. You can sign up for our upscale network with a free trial as we get started with the public's orders. Imagine how your bank account will look when your website gets the traffic it deserves. Visit us today. Well, Andrew, we really appreciate the feedback. Reed?
But
would you like to respond to his question there?
Well, I think you've said it well. We've humored Andrew for his very pleasant response to us. This is really probably some of the best feedback of this sort because most of the other feedback is in Chinese and I can't read it. So at least I can read Andrew's email. Well, that being the case, let's get into the real feedback. So Brent W. writes in, Reed, I just bought an FN-15 from Bud's. That would be Bud's Gun Shop. He says, I would like to swap the factory handrail with a 12-inch carbon fiber quad rail. Any problems in my future with the A2 front sight of the gas block?
So they make a quad rail made out of carbon fiber?
I don't know. Now, I want to let Brent know that I replied to his email with a couple of questions, but I haven't heard back from him, so I think the email address for the network might be persona non grata on a number of websites out there, so if you do want to hear back from me, take me off the spam blockers that you might have, and I should be able to get through. But, I couldn't get any feedback from Brent on elaborating on his question. I think the only thing that I can think of at this point without knowing more is that, once again, your A2 front sight is going to come off with pounding on those taper pins, and I'm very disappointed with my experience with that Colt barrel. Not that the barrel is a bad barrel, but that, there was nothing, on God's earth that was going to dislodge those pins, so, certainly that was a little frustrating for me. If FN is using the same pin seating technology that Colt is, Brent, you're going to have a real problem trying to get that barrel off, but I think that that's probably not the case. I think that what I was experiencing was a bit of a fluke in any case. Brent, do send some more details on your issue here, and maybe we can help you, but I haven't heard back from him so far.
Yeah, what I'm assuming is he's got one of those plain old plastic round handguards that comes with it, and it's easy enough to pop out. Depending on the quad rail that he chooses, it might be a drop-in system that just falls right into the same place as long as he gets the right length. Being that a 12-inch may or may not be the right length for him. If he wants to free-float it, get a little fancier, then, like you're saying, he might have to pull that front sight bus off and
so I guess
it out. Get a little more complicated.
Yeah. Well, does one of you want to take a crack at 2004 Ranger here?
Sure, I'll take this one. So 2K4 Ranger says, hello. Since you've been talking a lot about Appleseed a lot on the podcast, I just wanted to leave my 2 cents on my Appleseed experience. Just so we're clear, I'm a self-taught shooter and mostly shoot bench rest and pistol. I went to an Appleseed class in northern Wisconsin and was very disappointed. Maybe I had just had a bad instructor or I'm too stuck in my ways, but I would personally not recommend the Appleseed product to anyone. I was extremely disappointed in the instruction and found the techniques with the sling manipulation to be extremely unpractical in both hunting and range shooting. I wish I could have my 22 LR back. Anyway, just my personal experience, he says. Thanks for the excellent podcast. Always learn something new every time I listen. So that's one person's experience with Appleseed. Hopefully sometime this fall I'll be able to get to an Appleseed event and give you guys a first-hand report.
I intend to try to hit one myself. we'll have to catch up. You can give me some pointers on how to do that. You know, here's one of the things that I'm going to tell you. When it comes down to the idea of using a sling, of course, that's the way that the Marine Corps taught me how to shoot, and it is not an easy way to manipulate your sling. But then again, it's not a system that was designed to be used in the heat of battle or in a high-stress, rapidly evolving situation. It was designed to allow you to reach out to 500 meters with a good, stable platform and hit a target, again and again and again. It is, of course, the methodology that some of your high-powered rifle competitive shooters use. They get slung in and they get out there at much greater distances sometimes. So the technique is sound. It has always been sound. But I can see how someone would look at that and think, well, that's an impractical technique. If, being quick and mobile and flexible is your requirement. Certainly, instructors, they're not all great. We'd like to think that they're all great. We hope they're all great when we pay money or we take time out of our day to spend with an instructor. We want to be in the presence of somebody that is going to give us some good information. So, I'm sorry that you had an instructor you weren't happy with. Certainly, I think Anthony and I will get out there and see if we can't find anything about the instruction that kind of informs our understanding of it, and maybe it just may be that you had a bad instructor. But we do appreciate the feedback, and we appreciate any opinion. You want to write in and tell us anything that's on your mind, we do appreciate that. So I think that the next two pieces of feedback were really kind of a request by some of you guys, the listeners, to address some issues in the last couple of episodes with regard to our sound quality. That was Anthony F. and Dave in New Mexico, who both basically had some concerns about the quality. So, JW, you want to read Anthony?
Yeah, let me just take myself off of mute to do that, because that seems to help the quality. Anthony says, "Hey, I'm a longtime fan of the Black Rifle. I was really excited when I found your podcast." Well, thanks for finding it. One of the reasons why you did find that is because people leave us feedback. He says, "I looked through the back catalog of podcasts and could not wait to start listening. Finished listening to the two latest episodes and liked the information, but I found that the audio quality made it difficult to listen to. I tend to listen to podcasts when I'm driving, exercising, or reloading. I do that too for the first two. The last one, be careful, because you've got to be focused when you're reloading. And it was frustrating to have to keep rewinding the audio stream to try and catch what I missed the first time. I use an Android phone with an app called Pocket Cast to stream the audio, and either the Bluetooth in my car or Beats headphones to listen. I don't seem to have this problem with other audio feeds, so I don't think it's my equipment. Are there any plans to upgrade the audio quality of the show, or are there any audio streams that are better than others? Thanks."
Well, I think, Anthony, after looking at the issues, the WAV files that we record that our post-production team gets after are sound. There was no distortion in them. There wasn't any difficulty with them. I know that we've had some difficulties with some of the internet feeds, and if that's the problem, certainly that's nothing that we can control. We're trying to include our hosts whenever we can get a hold of them, because it helps us deliver I think a more nuanced and fuller experience for you guys. But I know that JW has absolutely no control on what that hotel is going to do to his internet. And then Anthony's been, what did you say? It's a thunderstorm season in the Deep South.
Yep.
as that affects the internet, those issues may be prevalent, but I don't think that is by and large the core of your complaint. But we are addressing it, and we want to let you know that we'll get on top of it. But at this point, I think all of us have made pretty substantial investments in the technology that we have for making podcast recordings, and it's sound gear. So I'll go ahead and Anthony, you want to take Dave in New Mexico?
Sure. So Dave in New Mexico writes in, again with one of the audio quality feedback pieces here. Reed, I just finished listening to podcast number 87, and what a struggle it was to understand you and JW. The audio quality was poor, and you both sound like you were talking in a tin can. Your words sounded run together and very muddy, not clear and crisp. Can you borrow Jake's microphone that he can't afford, so he says, and use it? Please go back and listen to see if you're not hearing what I am. If you aren't, it sounds fine to you, then disregard this email. I listen to yours and other FRN podcasts on iTunes.
So once again, Dave, like we were telling Anthony, we are on the case. I think we've identified it as a post-production issue. We have good sound WAV file copies. So somehow in the translation and through post-production, they may be getting the tin can effect on our engineers' equipment. But whatever it is, we are working on it. So listeners...
right, there's always a balance to be struck between having a high-def surround sound version of the podcast that is 2 gigabytes in size versus something a little more reasonable that's not going to put you over your bandwidth plan if you decide to download it while you're out and about. So there's some choices to be made, and we try and make it as accessible as possible to the most number of listeners. And yeah, the reason why we're reading this feedback is to let you guys know that we definitely respect it, and we're totally looking into it. We've got some great guys here on the network that are helping us out. And yeah, stay tuned, and we'll just continue to try and raise the bar.
So I think with that, we've got another good show. But I want to just kind of touch on our giveaway. I've come over to the iTunes, program, and I'm over here in podcasts looking at the Firearms Radio Network show, the AR-15 podcast, which is us, and some of the feedback that we've been getting from you guys. And, you know, we're just real excited for you guys to come in and tell us what's going on, and tell us how you're feeling, and get entered into the contest. We've got a great rifle going out. The rifle is being sponsored by Brownells, and we're super excited to give that away here at the end of September. So we're coming up on we're probably about 42 days out, and we'll have an opportunity to pick a lucky listener to get a new black rifle. So obviously we've got a lot of people signing up on the mail list. We've got a lot of people signing into Stitcher and iTunes to leave feedback. And you know, we just really appreciate it. We like all the good comments, and you know, as much as some people don't like it, we do appreciate all of you guys that want to be honest with us and tell us that you don't think we're doing our best, and want us to get better, and those are the things that help us strive. But you know, thanks again for all the great stuff and all the feedback, and it's really kind of encouraging to hear all that from you. So I guess with that, why don't we go ahead and get our outro started, guys? Anthony, you want to start?
Sure. So, as Reed mentioned, we do have our giveaway going on, and there are 3 separate ways to enter. You can go to ar15podcast.com/winner and join the FRN mailing list. You can also enter the giveaway 2 other ways by entering written feedback. It has to be written feedback on both iTunes and Stitcher. So please make sure, if you want all 3 entries, to leave feedback on iTunes, Stitcher, and join the FRN mailing list at ar15podcast.com/winner. As always, you can send us questions to feedback@AR15podcast.com, or you can send us a recorded voicemail by using the SpeakPipe plugin on the right-hand side of the AR-15 podcast website. You can listen free to the AR-15 podcast at firearmsradio.tv/iTunes, or you can share pictures of your rifle, or you with your rifle, or just pictures of your targets or anything else that you might find interesting on our Flickr group at flickr.com/groups/blackrifle. You can watch us live on Monday evenings when we record on Google Plus at firearmsradio.tv/plus. You can check out our YouTube page and see all of our videos and all of the other FRN things that are out there, all the other wonderful podcasts at youtube.com/firearmsradio. And you can also find FRN and all of us wonderful folks over there on Facebook at facebook.com/firearmsradio. As always, please don't forget to use the Brownells affiliate link on our AR15podcast.com website. You can reach that very, very easily by going to AR15podcast.com/parts. And as everyone goes to Amazon, please consider clicking through on our website first before you actually end up over at Amazon by using the Amazon affiliate links on the firearmsradio.tv website.
So was that all one breath?
I don't know.
I don't think JW and I could interject there and pick up the load.
I know. I kind of just ran right over it. Sorry about that. I saw you snicker in there in the background when I was talking. I thought, do I need to shut up now?
No. Well, that's all right. Well, Anthony, JW, thank you again for another great show. We certainly hope that all you listeners have gained some insights into the topic of zeroing. Obviously, this is something that's important. It's something that we have all done to varying degrees, and to varying degrees of success, Anthony. But
Yeah.
if you have any questions, we would certainly enjoy hearing from you, talking with you about it. And if you have any insights, if you have anything to pass on, if you have any tricks or tips or things that would make sighting in your black rifle easier for the listeners, let us know. We'll include you in next week's show. And that being the case, we're real close to the end of our build, at which point we're going to have a little bit of a function test, and you guys will get the chance to walk away with a brand new rifle. In the meantime, guys, have a great week.
Yep, stay safe out there. Have a good one.
Be good, guys. Have fun.
This has been a production of the Firearms Radio Network. You can find more information at firearmsradio.tv.